I'm here today with Charlie Wilson, who is the immediate past president of the National School Board, immediate after the COVID. So you had one of the toughest jobs.
I never left my couch.
Trying to provide leadership to a national organization during COVID is there's no rules on how to do that. But
in the middle of a CEO change, so I had two CEOs, the outgoing one and the new one coming in.
So there are so much we can talk about, and again, the purpose of this dialogue is there's so many districts trying to move forward on a whole number of fronts, and you hear someone with your expertise and experience can really help them plug in and give them some guidance. And so you may be getting some calls after this. So, but let's start with kind of the first one, which is that student achievement gap. The wider it grows, the tougher it is to close with the kind of skill sets that these kids need today to be successful. So could you comment a little bit on the student achievement gap?
Yeah, I totally reject the concept of a student achievement gap.
Really?
And because the problem is not with our students, the problem is not with our teachers, the problem when you're talking about different test scores is entirely with the test. And the test only tests one kind of thinking. When you're talking about a standardized test that's objective with multiple choice, it is only testing convergent thinking. Mm-hmm. People who are very good at coming to one specific answer and rejecting all others. Mm-hmm. And there are many people, many cultures, many racial groups, ethnic groups that are very good at convergent thinking. Mm-hmm. And there are many that are not good at convergent thinking, mm-hmm. and they're better at divergent thinking. Mm-hmm. And so all you're doing is reaffirming what we already know. The concept of a student achievement gap suggests that there's some kind of racial hierarchy with Asian American students, white students at the top, and brown students and black students at the bottom. Mm-hmm. When in fact, the real problem is our tests. Definitely all indications are that our tests are very biased, mm-hmm. and they are written for and by middle class and upper middle class folks. Yeah, right. And so why do, in particular, maybe some low-income Asian students do well? It's a cultural thing. The Chinese, the Japanese, their cultures for more than 2,000 years have been using standardized tests. And so the people who have flourished in those cultures, and so are all Asian students great standardized testing? Absolutely not. And that gets into, we don't want to stereotype any group, but if you look for generalizations, yes. White culture, mm-hmm. white European culture is not quite as good as Asian culture in that we're generalizing here now, not stereotyping.
Right.
And so you're just testing one kind of thinking, number one. And frankly, I spent 2 weeks, actually almost 3 weeks in China studying their system, meeting with their directors of education and their Ministry of Education, mm-hmm. and they're trying to get more like what they perceive to be the American system. They want to promote divergent thinkers.
I see.
The Chinese have never developed very many Nobel winners.
Yeah.
Not very many patents. They come from countries and cultures that where divergent thinking is natural. And so I reject the idea of a student achievement gap, mostly because of what they're testing. And secondly, the tests are extremely economically and racially biased. And there have been so many studies on that. Mm-hmm. Studies, for example, if you change the names in the very same questions, you change it to what are typically African American names for the word problems, guess what? African American scores go up,
no kidding.
White scores go down.
No kidding.
And so if you look at any of these tests, they all are very Anglo names.
Huh.
And so it just feels more comfortable. You also get the issue of stereotype threat.
Uh-huh.
And there have been lots of studies. Actually, I think the Hoover Institute and Stanford's done some of the best. You tell students that a math test for 4th and 5th graders that test 4th and 5th grade level math and tell them this is going to predict how likely it is you are to get an athletic scholarship. And those African American boys score through the roof because they don't feel any stereotype threat. They don't get frustrated if if the first question is hard. They figure, well, I'm good at this. I'm going to do well, so they just move on to the next one. And you tell, actually, they use different groups. You tell white kids or Asian kids this, and they tend to score much worse. Huh. You use the very same questions with a different group of identical demographics, and you tell African American it's going to test how good of an abstract thinker you are and how likely it is that you are going to get a PhD and be a great scholar, and suddenly their test scores go down. Because that stereotype threat there, well, I'm not good at this. This is not what I'm good at. And Asian American and white scores go way up suddenly because they can see themselves in that position. So there's so many levels. So I just don't like the idea of focusing on any student achievement gap. The problem is not our kids. It labels our kids. It implies that there's a problem with our kids. And then finally, the big question, do we really want our schools teaching our kids to be better test takers? Right. Or do we want to teach them to be great readers, to be great writers, to be very literate in numbers and understand statistics and percentages? Or do we want them to be very good at taking standardized tests?
What's going to change it?
It's going to take people realizing what it is that education is about. My view of one of the difficulties of becoming a truly outstanding 21st century educational system is we have not focused on what our goal is. In the early 20th century, it was all about turning out better workers.
Right.
When the public common school was started, and during Jefferson's time and Adams' time, it was all about turning out committed, engaged citizens. It was about, but we have not come up with what our goal is. And I hope, and so we've fallen into defaults. It's improving test scores. We're going to improve everybody's test scores. We're going to make sure that students from one ethnic group do just as well as kids from another ethnic group on test scores. And wait a minute,
what did we achieve?
And they're all different. I mean, every child learns differently, and different cultural groups in general learn differently, and one's not superior to the other. We don't have one culture is not superior to another, one culture is not inferior, but they're different. But they're equal, and they're equally good, and they're equally valuable. And our focus on student achievement, our focus on objective tests doesn't take that into account. And our educational system's geared around that, is just looking at the wrong thing. I don't want to turn out better test scores. I want to turn out lifelong learners.
Yeah. Well, hasn't there been a change based with this 21st century global economy from what you know to what you can do with what you know?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the focus no longer can be on just attaining content and knowledge. It's what you can use it, because we can get all that in our palm, in our little tiny telephone,
right there.
And it's right there. So we got to be able to use it. But we also have to appreciate the fact people learn differently, and that people express it differently. May I use one example? That we have a teacher in our school district, a 5th grade teacher, and what she did was assigned her students to learn about the Middle Passage. That's all she said. She was there. And that's all she told them, and put them in groups, groups of 4. And so you've got to develop a product after you've learned about it. Didn't tell them what to go learn, anything else. She had about 100 books about the Middle Passage that were age appropriate, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade age appropriate. But she didn't assign it to them. And so these kids know how to get on the internet. They got on the internet, and different groups were looking at different things. And next thing you know, some were saying, "Do you have any books we can read about it?" And the kids wanted to read the books. They asked to read the books.
Really?
Because the teacher didn't assign it. So her whole point was, if she had assigned, here, read these books about the Middle Passage. Well, for some kids, they might have been great. For other kids, and these kids were eating these books up. She said some of her most struggling readers were just reading through these books, jotting down notes, and asking for another book. And then they had to do a product. Well, how she told me that she pick the groups. She just did it randomly. She put all 24 students' names in a box, she said, actually, and drew 4 names out, and they were in one group. She had one group of 4 white upper class students, and guess what their product was? It was a paper. About a 10, and these are fourth and fifth graders, I believe, a 10-page paper. So it was a fine paper. That was how they felt comfortable communicating. Another group, she said totally randomly, again, because she didn't do this on purpose, 4 African-American students. She said they did a 30-minute rap song, which she said frankly showed a much greater depth of understanding of what life was like as an enslaved person in the Middle Passage. And she said it was just a phenomenal, she said it took so much time and effort and thinking, but stereotypically, we like papers. I mean, as an upper middle class white person, papers are what?
Right.
But they did a rap. Another group was she said was mixed in lots of ways, included an Asian student. They developed a ship. And she said they had, and it floated on water, and they had hooked up some kind of device that made the propellers work. And that was, so the ship, and another one did art. Again, she didn't tell them what to do. They just had to do a project and didn't dictate to them. So each one, and she said all of them were great. And they were so motivated to learn more about the Middle Passage.
Outstanding.
And she said they did so much reading. And so that is not dictated to them. And she said some of her weakest readers were just reading book after book after book. They were so excited. She said, and actually I came to talk to her. She's regarded as one of the teachers whose students improved the most from day 1 to the last day in reading. And she said, I've never taught reading in my life. I don't know how to teach reading.
Wow.
I just want to motivate kids to read.
Wow.
If kids want to read, they'll become good readers. If they want to read a bunch of books, they'll read faster and they'll read with more comprehension. So we've just missed the boat.
So how does that filter down to the average teacher in terms of, they're given, that you have to test to the test?
Right, well, that's the problem.
How do you change that?
If teachers are told they're going to be evaluated by test scores, teachers think the best way to do that is by teaching kids how to take tests.
Right.
And give them tests and practice tests and so forth. Well, actually what she knew was how Finland, which went from a country with a very weak educational system, in one generation went to one of the top performing countries in the world. And they did it a variety of ways. It's not just one solution, but one of the ways, they got rid of all tests in their schools. And suddenly their kids' test scores, because they were focusing on learning to read with understanding. And to, as you said before, to use the language. And guess what? That did reflect in better test scores if you're a better reader. And the same with their math scores. They don't test kids on, they don't do any standardized test scores in their system. There are other things they did as well, but they also focused really heavily on equity. They put most of their money into teaching the kids who had the least resources at home and put less money into the schools of the kids who had the most resources at home. America, without exception, does it exactly the opposite. We spend far more money on kids with lots of, who are very affluent, and very little do we spend on kids who come from backgrounds of high poverty.
Well, I guess there's a couple reasons I can think of why there's testing. One is to determine your academic pathways, high, medium, low. If you're going on a math tracking system, as a track students, I know when I went to school, and maybe it's changed, but you're either in the high math group or the medium math group or the low math group. The other reason
And how does that help children?
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
And
it doesn't. Because the high ones with the low ones could teach one another.
Right. And why don't we look at what the kid's passion is?
Right, absolutely.
And if a kid is passionate about mechanics and repairing cars, well then give them the background for that. But don't tell a kid because of their test score that they've got to go this. And especially given the hierarchy of status of certain occupations.
Right.
I mean, that's not helping kids. We've got to, ultimately, as I mentioned before, we've got to turn every child into a lifelong learner, and not just a lifelong learner, but one who will enjoy learning for the rest of her life, because things change so fast.
Right.
Nobody's going to go to one career or one job for 40 years and do the same thing over and over again they've got to keep. I mean, look at auto mechanics. They got to know computers.
Change,
The ones who started 15, 20, 25 years ago didn't have to know anything about computers.
Right.
And now we're moving to electrical vehicles. So combustion engines your knowledge of combustion engines aren't going to help you. You got to keep developing. If you're not a lifelong learner, if you don't love to learn, you're doomed to fail in this.
Well, it's wonderful to talk to you.
Okay.
It really is. You have so many topics we could be covering. And is there any last words? I know we have a long list of people here, but what do you have to share for board members who are looking for some real guidance in this area?
The critical thing that all of us, especially school board members, must remember is that every child is unique. And what works for some doesn't work for all.
Excellent.
And we've got to be flexible, and we've got to set up programs that helps each child wherever she is. And we got to remember what our goal is. Our goal is to turn out lifelong learners who love learning, who read well, want to read, and are excited about what they're reading. I mean, I read certain kinds of things that lots of people would not be interested in reading. But the point, so it's not what you read, it's how good a reader you are.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Always good to talk to you.
Good
Really
to
is.
see you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.